Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and we have a very exciting video that you probably didn't expect to watch this evening, and that is because there is a brand new work in progress Nintendo 64 core build over on MiSTer Discord. Ruleset, who made a few patches for some of the Nintendo 64 games, including Conker's Bad Fur Day that I researched on the Conquering Conker series, and Robert FPGA Zoomspas have gone back in and made a test build that fixes some of the freezing problems with a few of the games not needing to patch them whatsoever, because apparently there was a little bit of a bug in the physical versus virtual memory address spacing issues in memory allocation reads and writes. And that's what we've been talking about in all of these patches and all of these testing videos, that there seemed to be some sort of issue within the read and write and some of the allocations in RAM, because when we saw Conker would freeze, we would end up with this strange table that you could basically parse out and find out that some of the reads and writes were either butting up against something they shouldn't be or not having enough allocation to actually be able to read and write, like you'll see here on the memory map, which I'll show you in just a moment, those two green dots. So for a while what we've been doing is patching certain games. Jet Force, Gemini, Resident Evil, Conker's Bad Fur Day all had patches so you could play them, as well as a few others. So now some of those games have been fixed within the core, not within the patch system, so you're going to be able to play them without patching the games whatsoever. So the first one off the top is going to be Conker's Bad Fur Day, because previous to today you needed to have a patched ROM that was developed by Ruleset over on MiSTer Discord, and I gave you guys a tutorial on how to patch that ROM. It's not going to be important for Conker anymore, but you are still going to need it for Jet Force Gemini. I'll get into that in just a few moments. But now you can basically just play the retail ROM, North America, PAL, anything you want, including Japan, and it will run totally fine, because previously Conker's Bad Fur Day had a freezing issue that was intermittent and random, and the game would basically choke on its own memory address and allocation, and it would freeze the core and go into the debug menu if you had the debug ROM enabled. And that's what I did a lot of the research on when I was taking a look at what was going on in the memory address spacing, trying to kind of parse about what was actually causing the core to freeze. And of course I had to use a photo and video of death here, because that is what the core was doing on this game. It was basically just dying during its execution. So now if you go over to MiSTer Discord and you go down to the MiSTer Cores channel and pick Nintendo 64, you're going to go up to the pins and you're going to find a brand new build of the core. This is not going to be an update all. It may never be. It might take some months. We'll have to wait and see. But it explains exactly what it's doing, so you have a better understanding of what's being fixed here. There was an issue in the cache instruction set using the physical address instead of the virtual address. That's a TLB, or translation look-aside buffer situation, where there could be a physical memory address to the RAM or a virtual address that would then page the appropriate RAM address later on. TLB was a very strange thing on Nintendo 64, not many games used it, but right now Conker's Bad Fur Day works, as well as Star Wars Battle for Naboo, and that's going to be a brand new game that is fixed now. So when you download that core, just stick it in the _ consoles folder and then launch it from there. You'll be totally fine. Don't worry about that date. I borrowed it from a previous video. And you'll see here, TLB on the Nintendo 64 was one of the final bosses, quote unquote, to get every single game booting on the system, because it wasn't used by every single developer, and even Nintendo didn't use it in all of their games. But it was a way basically to use a virtual memory address spacing system to call to real actual memory. Rare seemed to love to use this the most out of any other developer, so it is one of those situations where it is surprising that some games use it and some games don't. Something like Paper Mario is going to require TLB. Now do be aware that this is still a test build, and people are actively testing the games that have always worked on TLB to make sure that they still work exactly as expected, so I'm assuming this is going to go through multiple iterations. But if you are a Star Wars Battle for Naboo fan and you've been trying to play on the MiSTer FPGA core, as of this test build, you can play the game from start to finish. You will have no freezing whatsoever, so that's added to the playable list. And that is great, because there was no patch for this game. Now the patch is basically incorporated into some rewriting of the core in and of itself, giving you a 100% playable Battle for Naboo, and I'm sure that's going to be very exciting to a lot of different people. And there's still some games that haven't even been thoroughly tested yet. So far I haven't seen a freeze, but honestly it could still be in there, because people are going to have to finish every single level of these games to make sure they are functioning. As far as Battle for Naboo is concerned, I talked to somebody who tested overnight and they were fine. So far, I checked out about 45 minutes of Polaris Snowcross, and I didn't see a freeze, but honestly, it could just be that I got lucky, as it does that it works. And as far as Resident Evil 2 is concerned, that is freezing for a different reason, so you're still going to need the patch in that game, because it is doing a slight cycle delay of 16,000 cycles between executions to basically keep that from actually crashing. So that's something that could also be taken care of in the core, potentially down the road, but the entire point of this is that there are still some bugs lurking in the Nintendo 64 core, and if you do need the patches, they're over on MiSTer FPGA on the pins, and again, I do have a tutorial that I will link below so you can patch the 2 games that still need to be patched, Jet Force Gemini and Resident Evil 2, and that means those games will be 100% playable. You can do whatever you want with them. And now getting Star Wars Battle for Naboo working as well is really getting the number of games that present issues on the Nintendo 64 core down to basically almost nothing whatsoever, and with further testing it might even get better from there. But again, if you're playing this core and you want to help us test, go ahead and pick a game on the TLB list. I'll try to leave a link in the description below, and just play around with it and try to get further into the game, because it basically just needs to be made sure that none of these games that didn't freeze before will freeze on the current core. My expectation would be that none of them would, because it was just something about the physical to virtual memory address spacing, and because these games worked, it should work totally fine moving forward, but you never know what happens in there. Community testing makes such a huge difference when it comes to all of these sort of efforts, and that is the fun thing. We thought there wasn't going to be another Nintendo 64 core, and as of today we have a brand new one here for people to test out. Now, as far as all of the games that don't touch TLB whatsoever, they should be 100% perfectly fine. You'll play them the exact same way as you played them before. Mystical Ninja starring Goemon here was one of the first games on TLB that finally started working, and people were so excited to be able to play this, and I'm sure there's still people out there playing it right now that could help us test. But that is the fun thing about these developments and how these things work in general. There's so many different methodologies to coding games and dealing with memory on the Nintendo 64, and TLB was one of the tools that Nintendo put in the SDK and made available to developers. And it seems like maybe 10 to 15% of the overall games would use it in some way, shape, or form. Even Super Mario 64, at the very beginning when we used to skip over the face to get into the game, there was one single TLB check there and it never saw anything else in the game in its entirety. Where something like Paper Mario is going to use TLB throughout the game at certain spots, and that is always the interesting thing as far as development is concerned. Why someone would choose to use TLB in the first place, what benefits it added, and what sort of complexities it added as well, because it doesn't really bring a huge amount of benefit to the table for the amount of work involved in it. And hopefully, you never know, maybe we'll have a new core in a week, a month, a year, kind of fixing up some of the last few problems that the game still need patches for. But that is the fun thing. The community is out there poking away at this, trying to get 100% compatibility in the core, and you absolutely love to see it. And that is always fun to be able to tell you there is a new core, because we all thought we were never going to see another one again. We had the core from back in March, and that's what everyone's been using, whether it's Turbo or the standard core. And one more reminder, if you skip ahead, this is not an update all, it's manual install via Discord only. But short of that, if you have any questions or comments, I'll leave them down below. Happy to help, but we are done. It's fun to talk about a new Nintendo 64, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.